All right, now you should
Boom.
get like a whole pop-up thing saying that we're doing this thing. Try that again. All right, can you see my screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Fundraising Fridays before a lovely long weekend, which I hope everyone gets to enjoy themselves, and I hope everyone gets the long weekend. Shout out to the folks who made Labor Day possible, our friends in the various labor movements, much appreciated.
Polly,
So yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know why, but your screen sometimes seems to jump from the one screen to multi screens. I don't know if you're moving your mouse, but it's on the one screen now. But if you move your mouse, I think it's been going to the multi. Yes,
Okay.
now it's at the multi screen.
Okay, that's the one you're seeing now.
Now it's gone back to singular. Now we're looking at you.
Yeah, I'm gonna try this. See. I'm telling you, there's a ghost in the machine. It's just trying to make me look human. That's all.
That's okay. It's Friday. Before a holiday.
Try one more time.
Yes.
How's that? What are you seeing now?
Yeah, back to one screen.
Excellent. All right. Thank you all. Thanks for having me back, Lisa. All right, so welcome to Fundraising Friday. My name is Polly Stamatopoulos. I'm the Senior Director of Movement Group Engagement here at Progressive Multiplier. And I've only been here for a few months, which is why I still very much like to, trip up and fall down and mess up and just sort of look like a goof. And then hopefully it makes me charming or something like that. So today's session is on the giving crisis and the economy. And we wanted to start it off. We usually have to have like a very pertinent opening picture to show off what's going on in the world. And the one that we wanted to show off today was that Mary Peltola won her election in Alaska. And this is particularly exciting, not just because she beat out Sarah Palin, but because of the way in which she won. And it in that it was a ranked choice voting situation. And we have grantees and strategic partners who are actively working on this issue and trying to spread democracy within our own democracy. So we sort of a tip of the hat to not only to her win, but all the folks who are trying to do those good things in the world as it relates to not only ranked choice voting, but making voting more accessible to more people so that we can get the victories that we need in the world. So this is the Progressive Multiplier team. And with me today is our Director of Mission Expansion, and that's our fancy way of saying our boss fundraiser, Lisa Riley. And again, I'm Polly Stamatopoulos. I'm the Senior Director of Movement Group Engagement, which means that I work most closely with our grantees, help with the trainings and with our strategic partners. Lisa, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Thank you. As my partner said that I'm Lisa Riley, the Director of Mission Expansion. And so I am all things bring money in the door. My background is I come from a CDFI world where I ran a micro lender for about a decade. So I have a ton of skill sets and experiences helping small businesses to grow and to scale and providing them with resources and technology trainings that they would not normally receive through traditional avenues. So my hope is, of course, that I'm going to bring those skill sets and be able to help Progressive Multiplier to expand and create additional sources of revenue to help the stability of this organization. And at some point in time, I would like to be able to help Polly to talk to some of our grantees and share some experiences with them and possibly help create some streams of revenue there too. But I'm glad to be here. Happy Friday and happy long weekend for everyone.
Thank you, Lisa. So she brings it in, and when I have the capabilities, I hand it out. I think that's a great partnership there. But you'll see if you've come to Fundraising Fridays, you'll see the other members of the team pop in and out here and there. But we are small but mighty group, gang of ladies currently. The ladies is the currently part, I should say. All right, so we help organizations build progressive movements of, by, and for everyday people. I think everyone on the call so far has heard this spiel before, so I'll just keep going. We make grants in achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. These are our biggest areas of giving. We are currently in the process of using our participatory grant making process to do environmental justice grant making, and we'll probably be announcing some stuff around that in the coming months. But if you or your groups or groups that have a fundraising experiment that they would like to try out and want funding for, you feel free to send them to our website and have them fill out an LOI, or because we never know when funding is going to come in the door and when we're going to have opportunities to give some grants out. So of course, our partners at Resilience Initiative and Leaders Trust made today, make today happen. Again, do the whole chat thing where you put your name, your role in the organization if you didn't already, as a means of introducing yourself, but also helping us keep track of everyone who showed up today. And what we do through these partnerships are these training sessions, as well as one-on-one coaching. So if you are here, that means you are probably able to get 5 hours of individual coaching, consulting, something from us. And all you have to do if you want to do that is reach out to Michelle Mengel, who is the organizer of Fundraising Fridays and sends out those emails that gave you the link for today's session, and ask her to if you could get some of our time, and then she'll do, if there are hours left, she'll hook you up with us, and I'd be more than happy to work with anybody. This is our upcoming schedule for the next couple of Fundraising Fridays. We're going to focus on some peer-to-peer. And of course, we always do them in twos. We do the educational session that's like more of the talking at you with a lot more data and info. And then the next one is more of a deeper dive conversational setup. So we're doing peer-to-peer hybrid events, reporting, and then we're going to do some, because nobody's going to want to really be thinking about going too deep in December. It's going to be a lot of forward thinking and figuring out what we have learned so far this year to help us for next year. So what we did it a little different this time, because the economy is sort of a moving target. We decided to do a little bit of a conversation last time and do a little bit more content this time, but I would say it's probably a bit of a hybrid. So we captured the thoughts that came up from that discussion, and we made sure to include some of that here. But at any time, please jump in if you have questions, comments, think we're wrong, have any specific concerns, pipe up, love to hear it. All right, so the recap. This all started because the Chronicle of Philanthropy put out this article, and I got a clip of it later on in the deck, but it was basically like, there is a giving crisis. And whenever those headlines happen, we have to pause and take a look. One of the things that sort of Bethany and I are like-minded about is, to not immediately bend when we see these types of flashes of worry. Like, what is the data actually telling us, and what is the appropriate next step to take when the data is telling us something. So the Bureau of Economic Analysis is a really useful place to look because it's clinical, it's clean, it's not emotional, it's just the numbers. So as you can see, um, personal income is in the blue, or the outlays are in the orange, and that's, you know, literally money in, money out. This is what's happening with people, and then our donors are people, so this is what's happening in their lives. That line up top above all of that in and out are people's savings and disposable income. So it's important to sort of, you know, take a look at this, you know, more sanitized data and see like what's really going on. Well, we can see that in June, this is, I believe the last time it was that we grabbed the update for it was, or that it was updated was in June, that outlays were definitely becoming bigger than income. So inflation is affecting people. This gas prices were affecting people. We also know that gas prices have gone down for the last 2 months. So I would imagine that these numbers would start, these bars would start coming back into closer relation. But it's a good, useful set of data. We can still see that people's disposable personal income and savings is still high, but it is trending on the downward slope. It's all useful information to know. But the big screaming thing that the Chronicle was trying to say was that you know, that all of this was going to affect giving right now. Right now could be, you know, is sometimes a blip. You know, so for example, I'm looking forward to seeing that Bureau of Economic Data change now that some of those prices have happened, now that we know that, you know, bills have been passed that are going to affect things. You know, the feds have, you know, are doing, you know, like lots of activities happen at, you know, greater country economy wise and world economy wise that are going to affect some of these numbers. So we like to sort of pull back a bit. And if we take a look at the numbers over time, we can see in these three graphs that this has just sort of been a slow burn that has been going down over time. The share of household giving is going down by age, by affiliation, um, and by income. So it's not just a right now thing. And in our last session, the way that Bethany phrased it, which I think is actually pretty interesting, is that she said it's not so much a giving crisis as much as it's a nonprofit industrial complex crisis. And if you were with us on those in that session, we talked about how, you know, like big philanthropy has, you know, makes such an impact on how on giving percentages, how, you know, how nonprofits are funded, that if they give more, or if they contract, it really does have an impact. But individual giving stays, you know, stays pretty, you know, flat, or, you know, close to the bone. But the other part of, so there's that part of it. But the other part of it is that the nonprofit industrial complex, all of the things around it also creates skepticism. And right now we're also in a place where people are skeptical of government, they're skeptical of nonprofits, they're skeptical of all of the spam calls that we're getting and all of the emails that are in our boxes. We're skeptical of politics, and it's an election cycle, so you're getting bombarded with political messages. I personally have noticed I feel like I've noticed in my career, I should plot it out at some point, that every time we have these big inflection point elections, giving is also affected. And I would love someday for somebody to do an overlay of political giving with nonprofit giving, because when you're talking about individuals and they have that one pot of, you know, they have that one pot of money gets going in and out every month, you're going to make those decisions. Am I going to give to my favorite animal shelter this month, or am I going to give to the candidate who I hope can knock out the, you know, the bad guy? And so sometimes those decisions are made, you know, based on just that reality. So that's a wish list thing that I hope we can get corrected sometime in our industry, to look at all giving, not just nonprofit giving. But this is literally the picture that started this conversation. Bethany grabbed this from her Chronicle of Philanthropy, wrinkle and all, that showed that, you know, since 2000, household giving to charity has gone from 66% to 50%. And the follow-up piece to that was to sort of show the individual giving decline and the foundation giving increase. Well, that aligns perfectly with what her hypothesis was, or theory was, which is that it has to do, you know, somewhat with the nonprofit industrial complex and the oversized impact that philanthropic foundation sector has in our nonprofit lives. So it's important to think about like the why of all of this, like the, you know, what is impacting 501c3 nonprofit organizations giving, starting to have that, well, not starting, but having that downward trend over the last 20 years. And put that in juxtapose that against the growth of alternative giving, like GoFundMe's, where people can fund directly, so they're not getting captured in that. Political giving, like I mentioned, is not getting captured in that. And then, of course, the huge rise in impact of DAFs on individual giving, because not necessarily because like donor advised funds are, you know, are they've taken, I mean, donor advised funds are taking up a larger share of the market. So they are not only growing in their size, but they're also growing exponentially in the number of donor advised funds that exist. Robert, I see your hand.
Actually, you're kind of starting to answer the question I had. I was curious if like the really big gifts that are coming from philanthropists are being counted under the individual bucket or through their foundation bucket. And if that has any, I'm imagining it's just sort of lumped into what's on this slide.
Yeah, you know, I'm curious about that too. I have in my, you know, in my career been part of teams that, you know, provided data for some of these studies. And I was always the squeaky wheel to sort of say like how you're lumping data doesn't match reality. And so I would also imagine, so one, I think that some of that stuff could be conflated by the folks who are gathering the data, but I also think it gets conflated within our organizations. I'm sure you've had the conversations in your organization, because I've had them from lots of times of like, do we count so-and-so's gift as, you know, an individual gift or through a family foundation? We have the relationship with her directly, but the check comes from the foundation. So just sort of like whatever each organization system to take it in the individual box or the foundation box. And then that data goes over to the, you know, yeah, at least once a month. Yeah. So like, imagine if you're having it, if I was having it, if lots of nonprofits are having those types of like conversations, then it means that the data is a little bit squishy too. I think it just sort of, to me, it underscores that, especially with family foundations, there's probably more of a need to treat them like individuals, even though the check is coming from the foundation. However, it's like an individual with an asterisk, because it's going to have some of those good and bad associations with it because of rules of foundation giving and that are imposed by the IRS that are not imposed on individuals. And also, you know, like they're giving through their foundation because they've probably been squirreling away the money for a while. And that's also part of it, nonprofit industrial complex, which is giving folks opportunities to, you know, hoard their, you know, to be philanthropic throughout their life, but it not actually hitting nonprofits, it's hitting their foundations or their DAFs, and then they give it out later. So it's sort of all part of the same thing. I really hope that we can crack this information a little better. I hope the folks like the Chronicle and the Lilly School do a better job of trying to tease us apart, because as donor advised funds are growing exponentially in number, we need different ways to look at it. We need different ways to tease it apart. We need better data around it. What is it, just to help us do be better fundraisers, but also like there are lots of movements to try to change that too. And we could also change the rules around it. So the more we know about it, the more we can also help try to change how they're doing business. So when in our last conversation and just around, some of the things that we heard was that folks aren't necessarily seeing the economic effect of giving changing, but we are seeing the economic effect of the expenses. So if you're doing any live events, if you have an in-person work environment and you're buying paper, and costs are going up, everything's going up. So inflation is hit, depending on the type of work that you do, that just the cost of doing business is increasing. So we might not have seen yet downturns in giving, but if your costs are going up and you're not seeing the upturns in giving, then that's an interesting note as well. We typically, fundraisers, we try to get those increased gifts anytime throughout the year, but we usually don't see them till year end. So it's a bad coincidence that this part of our economy is hitting at the part of our fundraising year where we're doing all of our planning for year end. So I think that's also could be why everyone's nerves are on edge around it, because we're thinking about how do we get to that year end goal when everybody's all the news is talking about. Well, we've had a little bit of a reprieve from it, but what a lot of the news has been talking about has been inflation and gas prices and stuff like that. So, going along with our thinking that there's not necessarily a giving crisis, but that but that we still need to make adjustments. There are things that we can do to offset the pending crisis or just the reality for people. So it's looking at channel mixing. It's thinking about our DAF strategy and what we can do to make to do better with our with either our DAF donors or trying to make ourselves appealing to more DAFs. Lots of, I know it can be a little bit of an enclosed box. Like sometimes it's tough to get in there with DAFs, but it is worthwhile. There's also an opportunity to start talking to donors about those episodic donors, like folks who give multiple times a year. It's a good time to start pushing them into a more automated monthly giving program. They're already giving multiple times. Let's move them to something more automatic, so that creates a little bit more of a safety net for you all. And then there's also opportunities to try to figure out how to catch that lightning in a bottle. And the easier said than done, but also an important thing to try. Kate. And also, like, you're muted, by the way, but feel free to just say things out loud, because I'm sometimes not looking in the right place.
Maybe you'll talk about this later on, but can you expand on what adjusting the channel investment mix means? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I believe we'll get to it, but if not, I will touch on that. um, just quickly, let's say if you do a lot of direct mail, this would be a good time to be like, hey, let's see what we can do more with email. How can we use social? How, what can we do in all the digital ways? If this is the season that you were going to do a lot of acquisition, because this is typically the season you would do a lot of acquisition, you might change it up, or you might change, you might look at your segmentation differently. So for example, if you know that you've got a big chunk of your list that is that are younger, and we talked a little bit about this in a previous session about how different generations are direct mail responsive at different phases of their life. So folks 30 and under are not going to be as responsive direct mail. So maybe you try something different with them and say, or maybe I'll just do a postcard with those folks and send them to my website. Maybe I won't mail to them at all, save money on those costs, but invest in texting those folks instead. Invest in trying to get their phone numbers so that I can text them if I don't, or try to communicate with them in other ways. So typically in a crisis, households are constricting, they're trying to, they're hoarding their cash. Nonprofits, development shops, we can also do that a little bit too. Like, where can we get the better bang for our buck? And it could just be a temporary change. It might be something that you want to think as a longer term shift as well. But those are sort of off the top of my head, some of the ways that I would do channel mixing.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I know that was like a very scattered and not enough caffeine for Polly, talking about the economic crisis. But how do you feel like, I would love to hear if anybody is feeling this showing up in your world. Is it showing up by nervous bosses or nervous boards? Are you seeing declines in giving? Is it showing up in any way? I'm not hearing anything.
Hi, everyone. This is Robert. So we're in the way it's showing up for us most clearly was over the summer. We do like a peer-to-peer fundraising opportunity. And in 2020 and 2021, it performed really well and did really well. And then this year it just went down. It's not a huge amount of money. It was averaging about $40,000, but this year it would only hit like 22, 25.
Oh, wow.
And we had about half the people create pages. Interestingly enough, our sponsors went up slightly. So again, to your point earlier, the institutional funding is there and growing. And when we did a debrief with it, there were lots of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons that we got was, we focus on racial justice in the outdoors, and it seemed like a lot of people were giving around reproductive rights over the summer, and that was a shift of focus for our audience, actually. So it's hard to know like what exactly happened, or if it's part of this bigger economic thing. But that's the way we noticed it most.
That's surprising. Because especially if you've had a couple of years of success, it's it's usually a little easier to bring back folks because they'll get it. But so for me, the I don't know if it's a red flag as much as it's a yellow flag, like a warning, keep an eyeball on it. Most people give to 5 to 7 charities a year. They can give to reproductive justice and to environmental racial justice work. But I wonder, so there is the worry about the economic collapse that we keep hearing about, and the actual impact of the economic collapse. And I think that we're probably seeing a little bit more concern around it than actual impact for our mid-range, especially our mid-range donors. I think for a lot of people, it's real every time the gas prices fluctuate, every time grocery prices fluctuate. So I'm not trying to dismiss that at all. But I'm wondering if folks are being a little bit like, well, I typically, would just throw extra money out to, the crisis thing, the reproductive justice, which would be reproductive justice at the moment. but it doesn't necessarily affect their giving in their primary areas. But this might be giving folks a pause to be like, oh, maybe, you know, I'm going to put a pin in Justice Outside right now, but maybe I'll hit them up in the, you know, in November or December if things get better. So to me, that would be, if I was in your shoes, I'd probably be like, okay, not happy with that result. However, how can I try to make up and rally these folks later in the year, hopefully when we get past this high level of intense focus in the media on gas prices and the economy and things. And that is assuming that we don't actually go into an economic fall off an economic cliff organizationally. So I would have the, if we do plan and if we don't plan, and if we don't fall off the cliff, how can I hit, how can I encourage these folks to, you know, the people who didn't participate in that last month, try to get them to, you know, do it maybe for year end or encourage it some other way. Interesting. Is anybody else seeing anything?
I could chime in. We've seen probably among our mid-level donors, no big change. In fact, even kind of overall an increase in giving. But we have heard from a couple of our major donors that they are kind of reevaluating their priorities over the past 1 or 2 years, and that they might be kind of like priming us for the possibility that they might be giving less to our cause, just based on maybe, I think partly it was pandemic, but also these kind of more upfront crisis issues that are causing people to reevaluate. So we have seen a change in our major donors, but not necessarily other groups.
Interesting. So in those conversations, are they just like using the, you know, navel gazing and figuring things out, the storyline?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
And are they really long time donors?
Yeah, our organization's fairly young. So yeah, they are 5 years. Yeah.
All right, fingers crossed.
No.
We have some, we'll have some tips coming up in the next couple of slides about how to keep folks. All right, so when we know a storm is a coming, we typically go out and get ourselves some bread and milk or beer or, you know, ice cream, depending on what you're doing, what your thing is. So we have that same philosophy here. I can tell you, I don't know who's been around, you know, as long, but the big fundraising crises of my professional career, of course, 2008, 2001, and we had one before that, but I'll just start with 2001. You know, we had, not only did we have this like huge tech bubble burst earlier that year, but the bigger thing was September 11th. And that really put, you know, it shocked everyone's consciousness. It caused everyone to adjust their, you know, it made folks fearful. When folks are fearful, they hold on to their money. It made folks want to support directly impacted people. So that also shifted people's giving, especially folks who, you know, your bread and butter donors, as folks who give small donations, but frequently, and that you count on them, weren't as faithful because they were giving to Red Cross and other groups that were doing things that were directly affected. Foundation support skyrocketed for very specific organizations and completely gutted everybody else. And because of the economy tanking right at that point, so you had the impact of the terrorist attack, and then you had the impact of the economic downturn that happened, but started well before it, but was, you know, added to because of it. You know, the downside, of course, when you have really big organizations, but really big foundations with really big endowments, those rules protect them and hurt us, the financial rules. So foundations have a 3-year rolling average where they have to make a 5%, give away 5% of their endowment each year. Well, if your endowment just went down by 50%, you don't have to make any grants this year and you can stay well within that percentage. Or you can make very few grants this year or next year and keep within your IRS threshold and still be cool. So that's how much the markets and the economy can really impact those of us who are heavily reliant on especially foundation dollars. So the bread and the milk of the fundraising world is going to be our individual donors, and it's also going to be, doing what everybody else has to do during tough economic times, just tighten up our purse strings, figuring out where are opportunities where we can save costs but still have the impact that we need to have. Acquiring, so that's the realistic budgeting part. There's acquiring from within, which we'll be going into, but it's really about like going deep into your list, all the way deep into your list, to those folks who you haven't heard from in a long time, then you put on the dead list or the whatever list you call it list. Doing some high touch retention tactics to make sure that your donors you're connecting with them and that you're communicating with them and you're listening to them. Of course, we're not in the donor delight frame of mind, but we're in the donor relationship frame of mind. And then also having casual, vulnerable, honest storytelling. And I specifically use the word casual here because one of the things in my career, like I said, 3 decades, that there was a turn in fundraising after September 11th, and even way more after 2008, was that it used to be much more formal. Any interaction that you had with donors was going to be like, "Dear Miss Riley," and it would have like the letter would still be warm. It would still be very, it'd still be storytelling. It would still be whatever, but it had a little bit of just a slight distance. We started to see, and at that, 2008 is also about when digital fundraising got better and bigger. It went from "Dear Miss Riley" to "Hey, Lisa," and our communications. And it became very much like Polly talking to Lisa, Polly talking to Robert, Polly, like me and you conversations that felt intimate and connecting. And one of the things that wouldn't happen previously is that nonprofits were often afraid to show any weakness because it was this feeling that we would lose support. Like, why would someone invest in an organization that's struggling? Excuse me. But if you can have honest, vulnerable conversations about like the impact of what's going on and how it affects your organization, not in a gross extractive way, but in a like honest storytelling way, then you're going to do a better job of connecting with those people. Maybe your donors, some of your donors can't give right now because of what's happening in their lives or the economy or fear of the economy. But having those, doing that bread and butter stuff of connecting and communicating in an authentic way will make it so that when they're ready, they're going to give to you and not to somebody else, or in addition to somebody else. Does that make sense? So does anybody thinking about the bread and butter, sorry, the milk and bread, thinking on what you do, are there things that anyone's has been planning that sort of speak to this on how to in the donor relationship, either acquiring from within or high touch retention tactics? Or is this sort of like the first time you really thought about how to mitigate against this?
Do you mean other than my annual nervous breakdown?
Sure, or your annual nervous breakdown, whichever.
I think one of the things I'm doing is kind of tracking the news cycle, which I do anyway, and thinking about how that shifts the language, because I imagine a lot of folks are in the midst of prepping their annual appeal right now. May even have it done already because they're more professional than I, but paying attention to the language and thinking about how I communicate the work that we're doing and how it serves. And I'm tailoring it a little bit as I, make adjustments to what I see people being really responsive to. I mean, the political and international situation take up so much space that it feels like there's not a lot of conversation right now in media about what's happening for folks other than gas prices and everything is this much more expensive. So trying to think about how our work actually impacts the lives of people. And, which as a natural history museum, that sounds a little bit silly, but what we do for educators and kids in the community and accessibility and all of those things. So paying attention to what's happening, but not letting it suck me into a vortex of worry, and actually having it help me distill my messaging is doing right now.
And I think that for you all, and actually for most of us, focusing on mid-level and larger donors, you can have conversations about like the cost of doing business and how that's affecting you. You can't necessarily do that publicly because it's tone deaf. But with folks of means, you can say, hey, the cost of doing business is, has gone up for us. So your increased gift right now would actually, keep, would be steady state. So of course, like you would say it in a much nuanced and professional way than that, but depending on their donor relationships, sometimes you can be that frank. But yeah, I agree that like thinking about like how to make your needs compelling and honest in a way that isn't tone deaf to people who are hurting versus to folks who aren't, and that's why having a multi-channel sort of approach or multi-segment approach can be very useful at this time too. So this is one of the things that we keep hearing is like the economy, the cost of living is very much a US thing, and it's because of us progressive folks or whatever, like liberal policies and bad this and bad that, and this is happening all over the world, and it's just not us. So that's a good one. It's a good like know that we're not alone. Also know that we're not alone. It's just important to sort of know what's going on around us, because you can't, just like with anything that we look at data for, you can't just look at it in a moment. You have to look at it over time. So yes, this has been happening for a while. We need, like it's an important touch point to make, but also it's been happening for a while. So we have been living in this moment for a while. It just hasn't gotten this level of attention as it's gotten lately. So getting into your own data. So it's, look at what you've spent money on over the last couple of years. Costs are rising. They went up almost 10% last year. So it's important to look at ways where you can, trim costs around the edges. Especially if you think, like, if you have that big indicator, like Robert you expect, if it typically made 40 and you made 22 instead, that's gonna clearly affect some bottom line numbers there. So if you know that maybe this isn't going to be the year where you have the big growth, or maybe you're going to make it up someplace else, but it's important to sort of look at the things that you can track right now and see how that can impact you. Like Kate, looking at your direct mail, for example, and seeing, is there different package construction that you can look at so that you can still do the mailing, but doing it in a way that's more cost effective, or is there a way to segment the list so that you're focusing on your tried and true segmentation to make it more cost effective. The nice thing about working with mid-major is a lot of that is conversations, phone calls, and that type of touch activity that doesn't necessarily require a lot of expense. So this might be a time for even if you're nervous, to pick up the phone and start having individual donor conversations with folks who have the capacity to do a little bit more. So the least cost per dollar raised scenario is one of the ways to sort of look at this, or move forward in this way. And this is where, I mentioned the going into your zombie file. So many times in my career where we've hit a moment where there was like a blip or a bigger, the 2008 crisis was one of our biggest economic downturns that lasted the longest amount of time for folks, because it hit us so in our core, because it was housing related. And so lots of folks lost houses. That, hugely devastating. Even the economic downturn of the coronavirus, like when it's plotted out on longitudinally, it's considered a blip in how it affected the U.S. Economy across the board. I've worked with lots of folks where that is not at all. It was not at all blip and is not over yet, and so you have to excuse the sort of flippant way in which data can sometimes present itself. But what is so it in the different times where I've had to look at bringing in donors, and I didn't have a budget to do it because I couldn't spend more money. It was just too, it just wasn't going to work because we needed to, contract our spending. I've always gone into my, the dead part of my file, or the part of the file that other people call dead. I almost never called it dead. They're just rested. So what's really great about the segment of your list, as frustrating as they can be to have them on your list, is that these folks already know you. So you've got one domino down in the whole acquisition chain. So if you were just sending out if you were doing cold acquisition, these folks don't even know you. So first you have to get over that hurdle. You'd have to, so your compelling messaging has to first break through, then they have to connect, then you have to have multiple touches and try to convert them from a lead to a donor, right? If they're already on your file, they already know you. So you've got one barrier crossed. Whenever I have tested an acquisition list against my dormant file list, that list has always performed better, just not good enough to keep fully active because of the costs involved in keeping them in the database, or the cost involved of mailing to them if I was doing conventional mail, or because they depressed my results so much that I wanted to remove them because I didn't want to be depressed all the time. So I would encourage you to go deep into your file. I've gone back 7 years, I've gone back 10 years, and I have segmented by how many years out that part of the file last gave, and learned a little bit about what it took to retain donors and what messaging works best for people who haven't given in 2 years as opposed to 5 years. Of course, the component of going back into your file is staff time. So no, it's never free. It's never completely free because your time isn't free and you might already have too much on your plate. But if you're segmenting your list to do regular appeals anyway, I would tack on a big chunk and try to do some donor acquisition from within your own file. So it's just cheaper and they tend to convert better. If you have one of those lists that converts worse than acquisition, talk to me, and I would be intrigued and just try to figure out what the thing was. What was the difference there? It's, you know, but also like, if you can figure out if, for example, a big portion of your dead file is from a certain time or period or event that really moved people, what was the thing? What was the secret sauce about that messaging or that time that brought those people in, and see if there's a way that you can test messaging that could help convert them over to either your new programmatic work or your new way of communicating or focus, or, you know, just do a little sleuthing. My experience has been that it's easy. It's testing messaging on a dead file actually helps you fix your messaging anyway. And especially if you've lost people because you had a messaging shift, you get more opportunities to bring them forward. Make sure you're doing stories. You have to tell your story. You have to tell your story. You have to tell your story. And folks, you know, like, share your impact. This is a really good time to help people focus on the impact that their donation is going to make on the world, and even the current climate. That, you know, what you know, if you can be different than all the emails that I'm getting from political parties that are just like, it's our fundraising deadline and give because it's a deadline to give, and like almost no other reason. Our organizations have great stories to tell, so tell them. Be human. Like, sometimes when we get in this place of like fear and anxiety, we get shorter, tighter. We try, you know, like, we sort of start leaning on we start, you know, getting a little scattered. I can't tell you how often that I've been in situations where, you know, like, because things are crisisy, there's a desire to like, we need to put our stats out and numbers and, you know, reports, and it's like, just because someone's feeling anxiety doesn't mean that we should be inflicting that anxiety onto our donors and our friends. So make sure that's why I keep saying we got to tell our story right, and make sure that that's the story that you're putting out there. Folks forget numbers, they forget statistics. So when you show your impact, don't just be like, we fed blah 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 numbers of people, but we fed Susan and her family, and, you know, and why that matters, and or whatever the issue is. We know that donor acknowledgements are the #1 rule to retain donors. And I can't tell you how many folks I work with who are like, yeah, our acknowledgement program is just like that, the automated email that we send after they make the donation and then nothing else. You got to step up your acknowledgement game right now. I mean, I'm not saying do the whole like donor hero thing. I'm not about that, but it's about making sure that folks feel seen and appreciated. Everything about fundraising is about donor relationships. So if we only treat our donors like in a transactional way, we're not going to build those relationships, and they're not going to be here for us when we need them. when you talk about, so like I said, about the showing the impact, like really make sure you're trying to make it relevant, putting your best story forward, but without going down the road of like trauma porn. Like I just can't tell you enough how much we at Progressive Multiplier believe in disrupting all of that stuff, that bad fundraising stuff that we've learned in the past, that we can do this in really authentic ways, and then that we know is way more impactful. What are the ways in which you all are communicating with donors right now? Or how are you planning your communications with donors as we move forward through the year? Kirsten, you said you're planning your year-end stuff. Is this a time to put you on blast to make you talk about that?
Hang on a second. Let me put my glasses back on so I can. Am I unmuted now? Yeah, I mean, I think that part of what we're doing too is I'm in the middle of kind of training a very tiny team to have a different communication strategy in conjunction with prepping for our annual appeal. And I think that all of the stuff that I'm seeing on your presentation today deeply resonates. I think one of the things I'm also doing is, the automated replies are de rigueur now, and getting folks in the habit. One of the things I'm doing, sorry, I'm a little over caffeinated and pretty excited. One of the things that we're doing is we're going back to having the board, because they're finally meeting in person again, getting them back in the habit of writing individual notes. Strongly recommend it. I throw a list down in the middle of the board meeting and during the time where we serve them a little snacks and say, if there's anyone on this list that you recognize, can you put your initials next to it? And here's a stack of thank you notes. And I've got the envelopes ready. And so literally all they have to do is do it right then and there. I feel like
Perfect old school high touch thank you method.
Yep, that's where it's at, going old school for sure. Sorry, that's a board member calling me, actually. I'm also making my board calendar, a Google Calendar, so that they can track annual appeal in a way that's a little more real time for them, just to look at it and kind of, instead of randomly sending emails or asking questions or waiting for me to send them a report, that way I can drop data into it that might be timely. Or I think the most important thing I'm doing right now is I have a very small board, and it doesn't look like we're going to have too many onboards before we get rolling with annual. So one of the most important things I think any of us can do is work with our boards, parlay their relationships. As you were saying, it's an important time to get personal, and I think it's really valuable to have them doing that as well.
I think that's really great. I think working, starting close in is really important. Thanks for that reminder.
And doing it now, it's September already, and I'm feeling like I'm behind in terms of board work. So we're going to have a little shindig and get together and chat, because rather than having them, and I recognize it's not viable for everyone, especially in larger organizations. I mean, it was not viable at PBS, but it is viable when we're in some of these smaller organizations, because you never know where that connection that they haven't even thought of they have is until you're actually in conversation with them. It's very interesting. Like, it has to be real time. I can send them all sorts of fabulous forms to fill out, but a lot of them, it's conversation with them. So taking a little, also 5-minute interlude during board meetings or your development committee meetings to get down to the nitty gritty, I think is super helpful right now, because of what we may or may not be facing. But, the writing on the wall looks like, in addition to DAF drama, I have DAF trauma right now. So But in addition to that, it's the cultivation of new or former connections is super valuable. So everything you said is very resonant.
Well, thanks for the board calendar idea. I think that's a great one. And especially, you know, for organizations that are whose board members are, you know, far away, like having it be a Google Calendar that everyone can access. That's a great idea.
I'll just share quickly 3 things that we've started, which is exciting because they've been on the to-do list and they're finally happening. One is the proverbial donor survey, but again, it is really helpful. It's a stewardship touch. It's segmented. There's an incentive to reply. There's no ask at all. On the second is a generic newsletter, finally, with a big donate button at the bottom. But again, mostly a stewardship impact focus. And not just from development, but for program and thought leadership, field leadership things, as well as calls to action around advocacy or policy opportunities. And then the third thing is we finally launched a welcome series to new donors. We've got 3 or 4, I think, emails that automatically go out and welcome them to the organization, each one with a different focus with some links. It feels good to finally have done those things that have been in the planning stages for a long time. And given what we've been discussing, it seems like the timing is pretty good.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think glad to hear that you have a welcome series. I think that is it's just such an important tool in retention, and especially like just even lead capture, like folks who come to your website and just give you their email address. If they don't hear from you until the next newsletter comes out, you may have already lost interest. So that's great. That's really great. Heather, are you guys doing anything?
I mean, we're still kind of looking to build things up from scratch. So it's a little bit tough, but we are ready to launch our new store on Monday, which we're hoping is going to potentially be an avenue to bring in new folks who may be willing to lend some support. I was thinking, as you were talking earlier about the dead list, about potentially sending our chronic non-responders a link to the store as well, just to see if we can get any of them back and engaged. We do already email like all of our donors, everything else that goes out. But you know, what we've really seen work the most is that very clear, like, for this much money, you can do this type of thing. And so I've also been playing around with some of the electoral stuff we're going to be doing, where we're planning on running some tests of like different postcard messages and ads to see what gets most people out to vote. And that is a very clear, like, donate this much, we can send this many postcards type of ask. So I think that's something I'll be working on soon too.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so back to the honest, non-alarmist conversations. So I mean, a lot of this is like it's so intuitive that, like, I know it's a lot of the stuff has sort of come up already, and that's what's really, you know, like what always gets us out of a crisis is just going back to basics. So you don't have to necessarily do anything like super fancy. You just have to like do the stuff that you know works and do it well. So the, you know, like, but also like guard against that desire, like I mentioned with like the hair on fire boss who's like, do this and do that, you know, like, let's make sure that, you know, like we're sounding the alarm only when the alarm is necessary. You know, I saw some groups really, you know, do some not great things on messaging during times of crisis in the past, of like, for example, I saw an organization that has nothing to do with racial justice or criminal justice reform or policing reform make really big asks around George Floyd's murder, and they got called out, and rightly so. So, you know, clearly that's, you know, that's a different brand of thing because that was co-opting a different movement in a different moment. But there's also, you know, also restrain yourself from turning every turning everything into an opportunity for you. Like, if it is legitimately part of your story, then tell it as legitimately part of your story. Like, really make sure that that you are, honest with the truth. Like, I'm not suggesting like put out there like, oh my God, these costs went up and this cost went up and this cost went up and we're drowning, help us. Unless you are, and then you want to give that a try. But like, just, it is important to have honest conversation. It is okay to say, our dollars, your dollars aren't stretching as far as they did last year, without, being gross about it. So, but by focusing on the story that you're telling, that, like what the mission, vision, values based stories that you tell, I think that you're going to weather this, because that's how you got your donors in the first place. That's how you got your friends that are on your list in the first place. So stay on, it's like, stay on brand, stay on message. Just don't act like things are hunky-dory if they aren't. And also by acknowledging what's going on for all of us, you are saying, I see you too. But just make sure you do it in a way that is, that is appropriate. And if you feel like you don't know what that way is, or you want a read, you could feel free to hit us up, and I'm happy to take a look at something. Or, Bethany's the expert on this stuff, way better than me. Bethany is always willing to take a look at something. But getting your message right is just really important all the time, but especially in a time of crisis, whether it's this potential donor and economic crisis, or a real crisis for your organization. So if you focus on bread and butter, if you focus on like who already loves you and communicating with them to make sure that they stay in the fold, having an open arm approach, we have typically seen that be the process of weathering the storm. Organizations that stayed around after September 11th and after the economic downturn of 08-09 typically made it because they went back to best practices and having open, honest communication. Does that all feel doable to you all? Does that all feel like, oh wait, I got this, maybe it's not so scary after all? Anybody who thinks we're full of shit and you don't agree, and you think that the world is ending, or that there's nothing going to happen either way? I love being told I'm full of shit, by the way. That was too big of a laugh, Heather.
That's
Sorry.
why we do development work, Polly.
So does anybody, especially any of the old timers, have any advice for any of the youngins? Or anybody got questions? No? Well, we have 15 minutes left. I usually keep the space open for like the Q&A part, but if folks don't have much left to say, we don't have to stay on. I leave it to you all.
I'm grateful. Thanks to everybody for getting together. I love hearing what you're doing, even if it's just a reminder to get after something I had been thinking about, or something I get the opportunity to see from a completely different angle. It's always lovely to spend time with other people who are boots on the ground.
Yeah, agreed. And I know I didn't necessarily contribute a ton, but that's partially because we're thinking through how to start this from the jump and don't necessarily have a bunch of big success stories right now to be sharing, but hopefully there will be more soon.
We're big fans of stumbles too. We learn from all of it.
Yeah, but it's good. It's been activating ideas in my brain that I'm sure I will completely forget on vacation next week. But in the meantime, I can pretend.
If you're lucky, yes. for a little while, and then you'll wake up on the first night back with a panic attack and making lists. Keep a
Oh,
note-
there will be multiple panic attacks.
keep a notepad next to your bed. That's one of my long-term development work survival nonprofit world. Keep a notepad next to your bed. I honestly mean that. I do it. It's between parenting and my work, it's very helpful to me.
I have no kids, but 2 senior dogs, so basically the same.
They're probably cleaner than kids. Robert, you need to come down to Santa Cruz and visit us at the museum. You're close enough to bounce down here.
Yeah, actually, we're having our staff retreat next month at Costa Noa, so maybe we will.
Yeah, definitely. I would love it. We're small, but we're mighty. But our public programs we do stuff up near Costa Noa all the time.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm good, Polly. Thank you. Thank you, and nice to meet everyone. And good luck. I'll have to compare notes in a few months.
Well, I really appreciate you all. Thanks for being part of a fundraising Friday before a long weekend. You know, it's always hard to get a big crowd, but I feel like they make for more fun conversations. We're going to start back up again on the 16th with our peer-to-peer part 1. If there are things that you'd like us to cover on peer-to-peer, hit me up, let me know, so that we can be, as we plan for it, we can include some stuff there. But you know, it is, especially with our organizing groups, have had some great successes using peer-to-peer fundraising as an organizing in their organizing models. And then of course there's just old school peer-to-peer like board fundraising and friend raising and all of those things we used to call it. So definitely reach out if you've got things that you want us to cover as part of that, or if you have any questions. And just again, if you want to get any one-on-one time with us, reach out to Michelle Mangle and let her know that you want to do that, and we'll set it up. Hope everyone has a great, long, luxurious weekend.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
We decided to plan a member event tonight. Thanks a lot, Polly.
Oh,
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Hi, thanks, Polly.
yeah.